Well, I have to say I am very pleasantly surprised indeed. This is how the Koreans do pickup trucks. My name is Kor, you're watching Korrmotive, and this is the Ssangyong Musso Grand. So, what exactly is the Ssangyong Musso Grand? Well, it's Ssangyong's pickup truck that they've been selling across the world since 2018. But actually, it wasn't always a pickup truck. Back in 1993, the Musso came along as a big body-on-frame SUV that used Mercedes-Benz powertrains. And then in 2002, there was a pickup version of that SUV, which carried on until 2005. And then in 2018, it came back as a pickup truck yet again, obviously without the Mercedes power. Actually, for all intents and purposes, this might be called something different where you are in the world. In Macedonia, it's called the Ssangyong Musso Grand. That's the full name of the model. Even though Ssangyong technically is now owned by KG Mobility, in some parts of the world, it's called something different. For example, in New Zealand, it's called the Rhino. In Australia, it's called the Musso XLV, so on and so forth. So, just to keep things simple throughout the rest of this video, I will simply refer to this vehicle as the Musso. You can make up your mind what it's called in your country, but for this video, we'll just call it the Musso. So let's focus on this specific Musso. This generation came along in 2018, as I said, and it's a pickup truck based on the same body-on-frame platform as Ssangyong's Rexton full-size SUV. Full-size according to European standards anyway. And it just received a facelift for the 2023 model year, which includes some tech updates, some equipment updates, and a new front face. This particular Rexton is also an advertisement in motion because it has basically the entire catalog of accessories, including this bed cover, which I'll show you in a moment, these frankly a little bit unfortunate fender flares, and the bull bar that you saw on the front as well. We'll address the wheels in a second too. So let's go ahead and start with where you should start with most pickup trucks. The bed, which, as you might be able to see, has something rather unusual about it. Here's the idea and what this bed cover actually does. You open the tailgate and you see stuff in the back. Anyway, here's the idea. First you open the tailgate, which is quite heavy like you normally would, and you see my equipment bag in there. And then you let your Musso unleash its inner Chevy SSR and Lincoln Blackwood with this. I almost broke it, don't pay attention to that. Yes, as you can see, the bed cover has a fully operational opening bit. Words escaped me for a moment. Anyway, for one thing, this means that you can store stuff in the bed without the fear of anyone stealing it. And secondly, it means that your Musso can look like a Chevy SSR or a Lincoln Blackwood, which if you love weird cars like me, is always a nice bonus. Joking aside, this also means that you don't have to open the tailgate to load up stuff because they can operate separately. So you close the tailgate and you can throw stuff in here. And also this has a lock on it to ensure that your valuables are well protected. Now, the bed length on the Musso comes in at 1.61 meters, which is slightly longer than the Volkswagen Amarok. I will be cross-referencing my review of the Amarok here because they're both pickup trucks. They are rivals and it's the only other pickup truck I've driven. So, 1.61 meters bed length, which is actually slightly longer than the Amarok. That's because this is a longer vehicle than the Amarok. More on that in the driving. And it can carry 1,105 kilograms of payload in the bed, which is slightly less than the base Amarok can, which was about 1,170 kilograms, I believe. But every version of the Musso can do that, which is awesome. And also, despite having a less powerful engine, it can tow the exact same amount as the Amarok. 750 kilograms on brake trailer, 3,500 kilograms or 3.5 tons brake trailer, which is frankly awesome. So, before we move on with anything else, I would like to address a couple of elephants in the room. First of all, some of you watching this video are probably wondering why are vehicles like the Ssangyong Musso and the Volkswagen Amarok not sold in the United States? In theory, they're pickup trucks and they would sell like hotcakes. And this is something that I didn't address in the previous video on the Amarok. That's because the United States government has something called the chicken tax, which basically makes it more difficult for imported goods to be sold in the United States. Certain imported goods like chickens, hence the name, and pickup trucks and commercial vehicles. And this is why every pickup truck and commercial vehicle that's sold in the United States is also built there. The Ford F-150, the Chevy Silverado, the Toyota Tacoma, and the Tundra, and all the like. The Musso here is built in South Korea, and the Amarok is built in South Africa. So that's the explanation as to why they can't be sold in the United States. And also, I think that if you try to sell a pickup truck that can only tow 7,700 pounds to Americans, they're probably gonna stab you. So, how does the Musso handle rear passenger space? Well, let's have a look. So, the driver's seat here is in my driving position. I've told you my stats, 5'11" and a half, 1.8 meters tall, Discord admin in width. I got pretty good knee room here and also pretty good headroom, but I feel as though the rear seats have been slightly compromised to make room for the bigger bed, and that's plainly obvious when you get into the middle seat. Now, the passenger seat has been slid all the way back, and I can't fit my leg in there, but it does feel like it would be quite cramped, and that's also what my passengers told me as well. But generally speaking, if you want to trek across the land or go on a small road trip with 2, maybe even 3 people if one of them's smaller, I don't think you'll have that much of a problem. You also have rear climate vents, you have pouches on each of the front seats, and you have an armrest, which, okay, it actually came down, nice, with 2 cup holders. And what about the front of the Musso? Well, you might be a little bit surprised because this is unlike basically every new car that exists. Let's see what's going on by starting the Musso. So then, what is it like in the front of the Musso? The answer is wonderfully old school. First thing that happens, now admittedly this is a base model and you can get upgrades to some of these things that I'm about to tell you about, but the first thing that greets you is analog gauges. Proper analog gauges, just a tachometer, a speedometer, and a monochrome display in the middle that can show you a few separate things. Then there's the steering wheel, which is exactly the same as it was on the Correndo, with your audio controls on the left side, your cruise controls on the right side, some nice perforated leather here in the middle. The leather on the bottom and on the sides is very thick, but on the top it's very thin for some reason. I don't really understand that, but it does mean you can get your whole hand around it. And in the middle we have the horn, which sounds like this. Moving on to the center of the interior, we have the infotainment system. I don't mean to be harsh with using quotes, but it really is just a media center. You can select the type of media that you want to listen to, so whether that be the radio or through your phone, either via Bluetooth or by wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. I have to say, one thing I love is about 3 seconds after you connect your phone to the system, it immediately switches to Apple CarPlay or presumably Android Auto as well. I only have Apple devices to test, but rest assured, it'll probably do the same thing. It just switches to Apple CarPlay and you're on your way. Moving further down, we have probably the best thing in the whole interior, physical climate controls. You can still access them through the infotainment system. They do pop up when you mess around with the settings, but you can do everything through these buttons and switches. There's one massive dial in the middle for fan speed and to turn on air conditioning or the system on or off. Temperature controls, recirculating air, all your good stuff, it's all a button. And you have little segmented LCD displays above to show what's going on with the temperature and the fan speed. Below the climate controls is, I think, the only option on this particular Musso, which is heated and ventilated leather seats. This is my first time trying heated and ventilated seats on, well, heated seats no, but ventilated seats yes. And they are lovely, especially in these hot summer days. Below the heated and ventilated seat controls, you have 2 USB ports, one for the system for Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. The other is just a charge port. You have a 12-volt outlet here, and something that's really interesting, a dedicated cigarette lighter. You can remove that and use that as a 12-volt outlet as well, but it's interesting, it has a separate cigarette lighter. And then you have this. That's right, the Musso, this one is a manual. It has a 6-speed manual transmission. You can also get a 6-speed automatic, which incidentally comes from Aisin, some of the best manufacturers of transmissions for this sort of application. You move it to the left twice and up to go into reverse. It engages the rear backup camera, but this particular Musso does not have parking sensors, which is a bit of a shame. It does kind of need them, but you can get them. They're not an expensive option at all, and neither is the Musso, frankly. It's very affordable for a pickup truck. And the last thing in the center console that you can move and touch is the 4-wheel drive switch. Right now we're in 2-wheel drive, which is most suitable for on-road driving. There's 4H or 4-wheel drive high for, according to the diagram here. It has a snowflake on it, so I assume for slippery and snowy conditions. And then 4-wheel drive low, which is for your standard rocky stuff off-roading. I've driven the Musso off-road and it performs exceptionally well, considering that the trail that I drove it on was pretty challenging. Also, the amount of shifter wobble in here is absolutely ridiculous. It's not that bad, but it's actually kind of funny. The transmission, it's okay, but it's very notchy. And I think that's the thing with Ssangyong transmissions. They're all just notchy, and I would much prefer if this had an automatic. And probably my favorite thing in the whole shebang is it has a manual parking brake, just like the Korrmotive. Gives you more control, really. What about interior quality? Well, most of the plastics are pretty tough. Again, it's a pickup truck, you kind of expect that, but you do have some soft touch ones here, and they're standard, unlike the Amarok. But most of the interior plastics are hard, although the seats are very comfortable, leather wrapped with good padding and bolstering around them. And that's really about it as far as interior is concerned. You have your lighting controls up here, your seat belts, which seat belts buckled in, climate vents right here, you can open and close them, the usual stuff. The sound system is pretty good, and the storage in here is pretty good as well. As you can see, we have a little cup in the 2 cup holders in the middle. There's a pretty substantially sized center console storage area and some pretty sizable door pockets which can definitely fit a large bottle of water both in front and in rear. Again, something the Amarok didn't have. Finally, let's talk about the Musso's engine. First of all, thank you Ssangyong for the hydraulic struts. It really saves me a lot of time and effort. Anyway, this is a 2.2 liter turbo diesel 4-cylinder making 201 horsepower and 441 newton meters of torque. It's not quite as powerful as the Amarok's V6 turbo diesel, but the upshot of this is the Musso can tow the same amount of weight as the Amarok while being significantly more efficient. To give you an idea, I averaged about 14.5 liters per 100 kilometers of driving with the Amarok. With this, I'm averaging about 10.5. So significantly better on gas while also being able to tow the same amount of stuff and being able to carry about the same amount of stuff. 0 to 100 kilometers per hour, for the record, takes around 10 seconds. The top speed is 180 kilometers an hour, or 185 if you have the manual. The automatic is 180 per hour, and it's a pretty smooth and pretty refined powertrain. It doesn't feel truck-like. It just feels like a passenger car engine, but one that's surprisingly capable. Speaking of, let's see what the Musso's like on the road. So, what is the Musso like to drive? I'll tell you once the camera straightens itself out. Anyway, what's the Musso like to drive? Well, let's start with town driving, and honestly for me the biggest surprise is how much the Musso lies about its dimensions, because the Musso is actually slightly bigger than the Volkswagen Amarok by like a few millimeters, but because the front of the car is a little bit more rounded, it's not quite as square and as straight up as the Amarok, and because the truck is lower to the ground and you sit lower in it, it's nowhere near as intimidating. It is longer and wider than the Amarok, but because you feel more like you're in an SUV rather than a proper workhorse pickup truck like the Amarok was, it's actually perfectly fine to drive in town. It doesn't feel intimidating. You can thread the needle if you wanted to. It just tells you, it's okay, relax. We're just driving a car, even though you're driving a massive truck with a massive bed in the back. Driving a pickup truck with a manual transmission, that's another thing about the Musso, it's very truck-like. Not pickup truck, but truck. So first gear is incredibly short. You get up to 20 kilometers an hour in first gear, you instantly have to select second gear. And the shifter wobble is also pretty significant. We're just cruising right now at 42 kilometers an hour in third gear. Perfectly happy doing this. And if I just look at the trip here, I'm averaging 10.7 liters per 100 kilometers of driving. I reset the trip when I picked up the Musso the other day. It's about 4 or 5 liters better than the Amarok, and that's really saying a whole lot. Then again, we have a smaller engine, we have 4 cylinders, and we only have 1 turbo. But it works. Don't go thinking that the Musso doesn't have any torque, because it has plenty of torque. Anything above mild throttle will just send you flying. And that's another thing as well that I really love about the Musso. The power band is very consistent and very reliable. It's not fast, as you'll see when we get on the highway. It's not exceptionally fast, but the power band is very reliable, and it's always available to you when you need it, even in third or maybe even fourth gear. And you'll join me in a moment on the highway, and we'll talk about what it's like there. And it's time for that point in the driving when we're about to merge onto the highway. By the way, these ventilated seats, fabulous. Anyway, we're merging on the highway at 30 kilometers per hour in third gear. Just gonna join it up here and gun it. Takes a second for the turbo to pick up, and then it does pull reliably well, but again, it's not what you'd call snappy. Just has a lot of pulling power. You feel it move forwards. It's not extremely fast, but it just goes. So on the highway, the Musso is very comfortable. Hold on, let me silence it real quick in 6th gear. There we go. The Musso is very comfortable on the highway. I need to stop yelling because it's not actually that loud in here. You can hear me. It's very comfortable on the highway, and it's not especially loud. Because the mirrors are way smaller than they were on the Amarok, they don't produce a lot of wind noise, which means it's not as intrusive as it was on the Amarok, let's say. That's the only other pickup truck that I've driven, so I can't speak for all the others, but the Musso is perfectly salvageable on the highway. And if you need to overtake, just drop into 5th gear, give it some welly. So 5th gear appears to be the time when the turbo backs off a little bit. So I'm just gonna slow it down. Let all the Need for Speed Undercover players on this highway overtake me. I'm just gonna slow down to 80 kilometers per hour. Slow down, slow down, slow down. And then I'm just gonna drop it straight into 4th gear and gun it. Not bad. Okay, let's put it back into 6th. Now it's time to speak about the off-roading part of the Musso. I drove it off-road just a little bit the day before I'm recording this driving part, and it's very good. With the Amarok, it has 4-wheel drive, part-time 4-wheel drive. You can select between 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive high, and 4-wheel drive low. There's no 4A mode like there was on the Amarok. Not really sure why. I'm guessing it's because Ssangyong wants you to use the 2-wheel drive mode for on the road. The experience of driving 4-wheel drive with a manual transmission was definitely an interesting one. There were a couple of stalls, I won't lie to you, but the Musso can hold its own. I'm actually surprised because that particular off-roading course that I chose was a little bit tougher than most, but it held its own. It was perfectly salvageable, and I believe that also this one does not have the locking differential, which just makes it even better. You also have hill descent control, and the Musso is very much a good performer when the going gets tough. In other words, another jack of all trades. And that is why I also love the Musso very much. Surprisingly so, actually. I'm very thoroughly impressed with the Musso. So the general consensus is the Musso is a jack of all trades. It can do city driving quite well, it can do highway driving exceptionally well, and it can do off-roading also exceptionally well. Solid job on that, Ssangyong. So that's it for my review on the Ssangyong Musso Grand, everybody. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel. Also follow me on Twitter. There will be a link in the description as always. And I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.